best resources, in my opinion, for evaluating the overall strength of individual Pokemon for use in Go Battle League generally, but in trainer battles and PvP for Pokemon Go. But like in sports, you don't want your team to be the 5 best players. You want the best 5 players. What I mean by that, and what this saying is intending to illustrate, is that we can pick the number 1 ranked Pokemon, the number 2 ranked Pokemon, the number 3 ranked Pokemon, but if those 3 don't synergize, if they have a similar common weakness, or a similar check or counter Pokemon that is just going to wreck all 3 of them, then that glaring weakness, that hole in your team, is going to result in that team not succeeding overall, especially in blind battles where you don't know what your opponent potentially can bring. So what the folks over at Silph Arena have attempted to do is they've created a new tool, a team building tool that analyzes the overall strength not of individual Pokemon, but of teams of Pokemon, comparing them in how they fare in comparison to other teams of 3 Pokemon. So we're going to head over to silph.gg and check out this new tool, as well as look at a few battles utilizing some of the teams that they recommended. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the channel, trainers. My name is Oro Chris. I am your catching coach, and we are looking at the Silph.gg's team building tool. Right now we are looking at the Great League, but if you head over to silph.gg and at the very top of the taskbar here, we've got the PvP resources. Then you will click on Great League, and that will take you right here to the site. And this is where they analyze the best sets of 3 Pokemon in comparison to other sets of 3. Now, my understanding is that they have evaluated the overall strength of each of these teams in comparison to 100,000 roughly other Great League sets of 3 to evaluate overall how well does this team do. So they provide 2 metrics for you. One is the matchup win rate. That is the percent or the likelihood that this team is to win in comparison to the 100,000 other sets of 3 in the simulator that they're utilizing, as well as a health score that weighs how strong the win is and potential in those situations. To give you definitions, the specifics aren't real important. Overall, we just need to know the tool is expecting Deoxys Defense Form with Counter, Psycho Boost, and Rock Slide, Mantine with Bubble, Ice Beam, Bubble Beam, and Altaria with Dragon Breath, Sky Attack, and Dragon Pulse to be the most winningest, the most successful team against other teams in the Great League. Now, this is organized by the lead Pokemon, as we said, and what's nice about the tool is that it lets you evaluate. Let's say that you spent the 100,000 Stardust, you've got your Deoxys Defense Form, you're ready to go, you want to test it out, and you can't find the right synergy. So this does a good job of, if you want to lead with it, here are some potential combinations of Pokemon that provide relative support to Deoxys. And we can see here, for example, what would Deoxys be potentially weak to? Be weak to Ghost, be weak to Dark, be weak to Bug. So, we've got Zweilous here. Not going to be weak to Ghost, actually going to resist Ghost. Not going to be weak to Dark, actually going to resist Dark attacks. Mantine, not going to be weak to Bugs, actually, as a flying type, going to resist Bugs. And then you add all of those things together, the rationale, the likelihood, the reason that this team is where it is as far as a win percent is because these Pokemon provide support and backup to the lead Pokemon, here being Deoxys Defense Form. And you can consider in certain situations something like a Mantine or a Tropius. Some of these Pokemon are going to be potentially either counter coverage for the lead Pokemon or potentially provide something more like a safe switch. For example, Altaria or Mantine. If you've got a Ghost or something that he's weak to, they're very likely going to be able to swap in and be relatively good in that matchup. One thing that you might notice jumping off the page, if you're experienced in Great League PvP, or you've had some opportunity to engage in trainer battles in the Go Battle League up to this point, is we're seeing a few Pokemon, Vileplume for example, where no one would suspect to utilize something like Vileplume. When you consider the typical, what I'll call Razor Leafer, the ones that everyone talks about are things like Ludicolo, Victory Bell, even Bellossom, Gloom. Even Gloom is a more talked about option as far as Razor Leafers. To see something like Vileplume with Solar Beam and Sludge Bomb is very, very unexpected. And that's something you'll notice throughout here. Is a lot of Pokemon that are on this list are Pokemon that you would never suspect to see in Great League PvP. That either lends credibility to this resource and tells us that it's providing some insight about synergy that the typical trainer is not aware of, or potentially it gives us some reason to have caution and concern for the accuracy of these projections. So take that for what it's worth. Overall, as I said, I did try out a few of these teams. I think that the tool on the whole does a good job of illustrating how to consider team building. What is this Pokemon likely to face as far as a weakness, and what can things come in to support it? So for example, Deoxys Defense Form is going to do resisted damage to a flying type. So we have something like Mantine or like Altaria that are not going to take super effective damage from a flying type. So you're at least going to have some type of coverage, especially with Mantine here with Ice Beam that's going to hit flying types for super effective damage. So they provide the support necessary for this Pokemon to, one, succeed, or two, have a switch so that when it comes back in, it can feel like it's not going to be run over in the match. The downside, my caution for using this tool and tools like it, is one, from my understanding, is that this is a static snapshot. And what I mean by that is it does not evaluate and weight what matchups are being won as the meta in the Great League or in Go Battle League shifts. So what do I mean by that? In week one, we might have a bunch, as we know that we did, a bunch of Deoxys Defense Form. Week two, we might see a bunch of Haunter, something that's going to resist the counter damage and is going to do super effective damage in response to Deoxys Defense Form. And then week three, we might see then an influx. And actually, this has actually been happening on day 1, 2, and 3, so follow along with me. So on day 3, after everyone started using the Haunter, we might see either some dark types, or we might see an increase of ground types. And then that's responded with more grass types to respond to the ground types, and so forth. So what this does is it doesn't evaluate one. For example, having an 81.4% win rate is great. But if you're winning every matchup against teams you're never going to see, how important or useful is that statistic, or how important or useful is it to run a team that doesn't consider the potential meta all-stars? What we'd like to know is against teams like Registeel, like Altaria, Deoxys Defense Form, Azumarill, when teams have those powerhouses that everyone's using, what sets of 3 are the anti-meta? What sets of 3 are able to break down those barriers and pull out those wins? I don't care if a team has the highest win percentage against 100,000 possible combinations. I care if they win the 10% of teams that I see on a daily basis. So that's one thing. Number 2 is, this could say it's a 99% win rate. But if all 3 Pokemon have a common glaring weakness to a very meta-relevant Pokemon, then you're in a huge heap of trouble. And that is something that we'll get into specifically with regard to this team that I tried it. Deoxys Defense Form, this is recommending Psycho Boost Rock Slide. So we've got only neutral damage against something like an Azumarill and nothing super effective. Moreover, the counter damage is going to be resisted. So not going to be able to handle, for the most part, a Azumarill in the battle. Next up, we've got Mantine, running Bubble, Ice Beam, Bubble Beam. The Bubble is going to do nothing to something as bulky as Azumarill. Moreover, as a water type, it's going to resist it. And Ice Beam's the only, like, really powerhouse, that we can call it that, charge move that Mantine has access to. It's not going to pull out much damage against Azumarill in that case. Sure, it'll weaken it with the Bubble Beam. And then we've got Dragon Breath, immunity to resistance as a fairy type Azumarill is going to have. So it's going to resist that. It's going to take neutral damage from the Sky Attack. It's going to have immunity to resistance to the Dragon Pulse. So all three of these Pokemon are going to have a losing matchup against something as meta-relevant as Azumarill. So this could say 99% win rate. But if everyone's running a team is the 1% that it loses to, what am I going to do with that? And that's ultimately, for example, what this team I ended up finding was that there are certain Pokemon that you see all the time that it has no answer for. So again, in summation, I think that the tool does a great job of analyzing synergy, and I think it's a great starting place to consider how do certain Pokemon, if you want to use them, and specifically if you want to use them in the lead position, what Pokemon potentially can synergize with them and provide the support for them to shine. I would recommend, if once you've decided I want to use Deoxys Defense Form, then evaluate, maybe go through I'll put a link down below to the video yesterday discussing the 3 ranking systems that are available online. Go to one of those ranking sites and look at the top 10, top 15 Pokemon for the league you're in. And if these 3 Pokemon can't win matchups against those top 15 Pokemon, if there's one that it's missing, consider which one of these combinations can I potentially switch to that will at least have an answer. So for example, Registeel is at least going to have a better matchup, and depending on how it shields and some of the decisions of the opponent on an Azumarill matchup can win an Azumarill. These 3 at least have that answer. So it's a starting place, but we need to consider, you can't net deck. You can't just go online and say the ranking system says this is the best, run it and see what happens. I'm a content creator. I was testing it out just to see what happens. So we'll get into those videos now and we'll get an idea. All right, so as we said, the top rated team on the Silph Arena's team building tool was a lead of Deoxys Defense Form, followed by Mantine, whatever you want to call it, and Altaria. We are running Counter, which is the only viable fast move for the most part. Zen Headbutt, as far as an alternative for Deoxys Defense Form, is not an alternative in nearly all circumstances. The tool recommended Rock Slide as well as Psycho Boost. We've got Mantine running Bubble, Ice Beam, and Bubble Beam. Bubble Beam having that debuff to the opponent's attack stat. So that is a certainly more spammable move, doesn't do a lot of damage, very little damage actually, but it does a great job of debuffing the opponent so they're not hurting you as much, even though you're not hurting them as much. And of course, the meta relevant and always present Altaria, running standard set of Dragon Breath, Sky Attack, and Dragon Pulse. Now this set of videos was shot when I was in rank 4. It was shot a couple of days ago, so we are working through catching up on some editing, but you will see as we go through, we've got some at rank 4, some potentially less than meta common picks. We've got a Seismitoad running Muddy Water, That is one of the new Mud Boys, one of the potential alternatives to the Mud Boys in the Ultra League. Things like Wishcash and Quagsire don't have the CP necessary to really compete at the Ultra League, but typically those two do an amazing job, as well as the ever-present Swampert. If you have not made a Swampert with Hydro Cannon specifically for all 3 leagues, I cannot recommend enough getting one for each of the PvP leagues. Hydro Cannon with the energy gain from Mudshot just does an amazing job in Swampert, and especially with the inclusion of Dialga in Masters League. Having that as a steel type of ground weakness just makes it amazing. So here we've gotten rid of the Seismitoad, we've got Umbreon in the back for the opponent. Now here you're going to see we're going to try to weaken the attack stat of the Umbreon as much as possible, because the Ice Beam, although more damage, Umbreon's just so bulky, it's not going to do enough and it's not going to be super effective. So we're going to try to, as best as possible, debuff the opponent. Now here I make this was the play. I made a gross misplay there. I should have stuck in with the Mantine. Instead, in my mind, for like a moment, I was like, all right, I've debuffed Umbreon. Why don't I jump out and take advantage of this debuffed Umbreon, and then I can debuff whoever's in the back with Mantine, completely forgetting, oh, they can switch out too, which is exactly what they do. So when they switch out, they clear the debuffs. So completely void all the effort that I had put in to debuff the Umbreon in the first place. And now we've got a bad matchup here. The steel typing of Skarmory resisting the Dragon Breath damage, as well as the flying type damage from Sky Attack. We're just in a bad spot all around. I'm going to do my best to try to turn this thing around, but at this point we've got the Umbreon with the cleared debuffs of the Bubble Beams we had done previously. So we're going to try to outlast the opponent as much as possible, debuff, and just hope for the best. But it is going to be a close one. Here you can see how much less damage Foul Play doing than what it traditionally would do. Mantine, although bulky for as far as some Pokemon go, not that bulky. It is definitely the bubbles that are helping. And you can see here one of the issues that I came across with this team. Now here we're running out of time. I'm just going to try to get off as much damage as possible because the timer for the match is closing out. And we are getting down to the wire. Time's up. And we lost by a shred. So when you time out in a Pokemon Go PvP battle, it goes down to who has the most health left. And as you can see, we were down to the wire, and by the narrowest of margins. I mean, go back to the replay. They pull out the win by probably just 1 or 2 extra fast moves, but ultimately they do pull out the win. So, first match is a loss with the Silph Arena's recommended team. Again, admittedly, a misplay on my part, but it did go down to time, but it wasn't a close game nonetheless. What hurts the most is it was a loss with a Seismitoad. So had it been a Swampert or a Quagsire, I would have understood, but nonetheless. So here we've got, again, and as we mentioned earlier when we were summarizing the Silph Arena's tool, we've got Azumarill here. We don't have an electric attack on the Deoxys defense form. We've got nothing that's going to do super effective damage into the Azumarill. He has swapped out now into the Wishcash, one of the Mud Boys. Now, if he attempts to hit me with the Blizzard as a flying type, it would typically do super effective damage, but because of the water subtyping, that negates the super effective damage, so it's just going to be neutral damage. Blizzard, of course, however, is a very powerful move, but we're going to do our best to get off as many of these Bubble Beams as possible to weaken the opponent. Again, because of the ground typing, that would typically take super effective damage from the water attack of Bubble and Bubble Beam, but because of the water subtyping of Wishcash, that negates that water super effective damage, making it just neutral. So we're both doing neutral damage to each other. However, the Mudshot is on Wishcash into the Mantine is doubly resisted because of the flying immunity to resistance to the ground type attacks. So Mud Shot not doing virtually any damage, however charging energy very quickly to help the opponent get off some of those blizzards at the end. So here we've got a water attack into a water attack, or water attack into a water Pokemon, both ways, and we're just trying to get to that Bubble Beam as many times as possible. We're not able to get there. Now here, I've got a Psycho Boost charged. It's questionable whether or not I shield this. Psycho Boost is going to do, of course, a good chunk of damage with the super effective same type attack bonus for the Deoxys. We do pull it out there, but it is going to weaken my Deoxys defense form. That is one of the problems. They buffed, loosely using that term, buffed the damage or the how energy efficient the Psycho Boost attack was, but it does come at a cost of debuffing the attack. So you want to use Psycho Boost if you're going to use it in a battle as late as possible. Get off as much fast attack damage and as many other charge attacks as possible, so that when you ultimately do use the Psycho Boost, that debuff is not going to negatively impact your attacks during the rest of the battle. And here, as you can see, we've got another match going to time. The Mantine, how quickly it spams the Bubble Beam, and Bubble, I think, charging the fast moves relatively quickly, or charging the charge moves relatively quickly. I can speak. Burning the shields and going through that charge move animation each time really draws out the match. And then you add into that how bulky a Pokemon like Deoxys defense form is, or like a Pokemon like Altaria, and ultimately that results in a lot of these matches. If you're in a neutral match or you're not hitting for super effective, then you're in a situation where the match is just going to drag on. So here, the opponent, one problem with the Deoxys defense form, as a Psychic type, Deoxys defense form is going to resist the attack of Psycho Boost. You would never, of all the available attacks, never want to use that because it's going to be resisted. Moreover, if you're in a niche and if it's a cheaper move and you need to use it, as opposed to potentially like something like Thunderbolt at the end of the match, do it at the end so that you're not debuffing yourself. So right now he's debuffed himself, not once, not twice, but I think he goes for 3 of them, and he's doing virtually no damage. On top of that, the counter damage of Deoxys defense form as a fighting type move is resisted. So now he's debuffed himself at least twice. I may have lost count, maybe 3 times. He's doing, see, again, just doing no damage to me. And I'm able to launch these at least neutral damage rock slides. So you definitely, in the mirror match, that is one instance where rock slide is definitely the advantageous move, because if you don't land a good bait, you're going to be in a better situation using something like rock slide versus the opposing Deoxys defense form. So here, he's got the Altaria out, slight lead on the energy gain, and I don't really have an option as far as a super effective damage into the Azumarill, as we mentioned previously. Again, another instance where an opponent is running an Azumarill, especially in the lower ranks, rank 4, rank 5, rank 6. That is a Pokemon that if you've done any PvP before, everyone's familiar with and everyone has. So we've got now 2 water attackers hitting each other with water type damage, not doing very much. He's at least got the something that'll do unresisted damage in the Play Rough, whereas my Bubble Beam is only going to draw out the battle, weaken the attack stat of the opponent, do virtually, I mean, look at that, the bulk of Azumarill and how little damage Bubble Beam does regardless, just dragging this match out. So we have what it looked like cut the damage done by the Play Rough into at least half of what it was doing initially. We're going to continue to try to wear this thing down and just weaken the opponent as much as possible, so that when we get to our ultimate next Pokemon from after the switch, they won't be able to do as much damage. Now, in the main series game, there's a limit on debuffs and buffs. You can only raise your stats, I think, 6 times, not a 6 times multiplier, but raise it an attack of 6 raise. whatever. I'm not saying that exactly. You know what I'm saying. Here, I don't know if there's a limit on the amount of times you can buff or debuff. I'd have to look into that. If someone knows, leave a comment down below. I'd love to have the answer to that. But as you can see, we go to a third match that goes to time. So here, as you can see, we've got I think ultimately with this team, after going 3 matches out of a set of 5, I think I used it 4 or 5 matches to test it out. One that may not have been recorded. 3 of the 5 or 3 of the 4 went to time. I think I ended up pulling out the win in 2 of those timed matches. But ultimately, no answer to Azumarill. I became aware later on in the week that a common Pokemon that folks started to use was Alolan Raichu. This team again has no answer to an Alolan Raichu, and oof, that Mantine. That's gonna be a rough matchup. So ultimately, this was a good example that the Silph Arena tool, these Pokemon may synergize extremely well. But the problem is raised that if a common Pokemon, such as Azumarill, has no answer, knowing that this team does better than other combinations of teams, or potentially better than any other combination of teams versus all the other possible combinations of Great League sets of 3, doesn't tell us as relevant an information as what is the success rate of this team versus most often used Pokemon. So we've got 3 matches all going to time. No one wants to win by a timeout. The opponent doesn't like it coming down to who has more health in the end. The match drags on. It's harder to move up the ladder. So in the next video, we're going to be looking at another one of these Silph recommended teams, but it was a team that I picked with the knowledge after having tested this one that I need an answer for Azumarill. And this team, although synergistic, did not provide the support that I needed to have an answer for something as relevant as Azumarill. So we'll get in that in the next video. If there are any combinations of teams that you checked out on the Silph Arena's website that you think are interesting, that you'd like to check out on the channel, please leave a comment down below. As you know, we are making a push to rank 10. We're on the road to rank 10 challenge, and we are doing our best. See how it goes. If you're interested in Pokemon Go, competitive PvP, and basically anything Pokemon related, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time.